Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to start our review for Chapter 9. So we are going to start by reviewing 9.4 and then just going back through all of our lessons. So the first thing we're going to do is solve this equation. Now, whenever we're trying to solve an equation with these kinds of numbers, we're looking for our zeros. So we're looking for something to equal 0. Now, how I get this to equal 0? Well, I know that I'm going to move the 15r to the other side. So then we'll be left with 30r squared plus 15r equals 0. Now, if I take a look at what I have, well, I have a 30 and a 15. I know that I can take out 15r from both of those. So if I do that, I'm going to be left with 2r, and then I'm going to have plus 1 equals 0. So now I'm left with 15r times 2r plus 1 equals 0. So what I do now is when I'm solving this, I'm going to set 15r equal to 0, and I'm going to set 2r plus 1 equal to 0. If I divide by 15 here, our r is going to equal 0. Then over here I need to subtract 1 first and get 2r equals a negative 1. Divide by 2. And our second r, our second 0, is a negative 1/2. So we have two zeros. That's going to help us later when we start graphing parabolas. Next one, same thing. I'm going to move over the 4c. So we can get 8c squared minus 4c equals 0. Now I see that I can take a 4c out of both of these. So I'll take out 4c. If I take out 4c from 8c squared, I'm left with 2c. And if I take out 4c from negative 4c, I'm left with a negative 1. And that's going to equal 0. So we'll have 4c equals 0, and 2c minus 1 equals 0. Divide by 4, c equals 0. Here I'm going to add 1 and get 2c equals 1. Divide by 2, and c is going to equal 1/2. So our two zeros are 0 and 1/2. Next one, we're looking at desktop areas. So it says you have two components to a desk where you do your homework that fit together in an L shape. The two components have the same area. Write an equation that relates the areas of the desktop components. Well, I see that these are rectangular, and the rectangular area is length times width. So I'm going to look at my first rectangle. Now I see that my width is W, and my length, which I'm going to multiply, it looks like it's 1/2 of the W plus 3 for the 3 feet. Now my second rectangle has the same width, and that width is W. This one, though, has a length of 7 minus W. So then if this is my equation, I am going to multiply these out. So W times W is going to be W squared. W times 3 is going to be positive 3W equals W times 7, which is 7W, and W times negative W, which is negative W squared. So now I got to combine what I can. I'm going to add W squared over here. So I'm going to get 2W squared. Then I'm going to subtract 7W and get negative 4W, and then what's left on this side is equals 0. Now this is what's going to help us to find the value of W. I see that I can take out 2W out of both of these, which is going to leave me with W minus 2 equals 0. Then just like in the first slide, I'll have 2W equals 0 and W minus 2 equals 0. Divide by 2, W equals 0, and add 2, W equals 2. Now, which one of those makes sense? Well, it makes sense that W equals 2 is a length. W equals 0 means that we don't have a length for W, which that doesn't make sense. So we know that W equals 2 is our answer. Alright, now we are going to factor this trinomial. To do that, we need to create a diamond problem. Now remember, ax squared times c goes up at the top. Now my a in this problem is 1 because it's with the w squared. So 1 times negative 13 gives us a negative 13w squared. Bx goes on the bottom. Now if we write this all out, I guess ax squared plus bx plus c is what we're using. So bx is in the middle. That's a negative 12w. Now dx and ex go on the outside. Now dx and ex, they add up together to make negative 12, but multiply together to make negative 13. So the only things that I know that can multiply to get to 13 would be a 1 and a 13, but this is negative, so one of these has to be negative, so it could be negative 1 and 13 or 1 and negative 13. Which one of those add up to negative 12? Well, negative 13w and 1w add up to 13, or negative 12. So now that I figured out my diamond, I'm going to draw a box so I can factor these out. In the top box, I have ax squared. In this case, that was 1x or 1w squared. In this box, I have c. C was negative 13. Here we have dx, which was negative 13x, or w. And then we have ex, which we found was just 1w. So the only things that multiply to 1 are 1 and 1. We have a w here and a w here. So I know that I have to have a w here and a w here. W times w gives us w squared. 1w times what gives us negative 13? Well, that's negative 13. And 1w times 1 is going to give us 1w. So our two factors then are 1w minus 13 and 1w, I'll write that a little bit better, plus 1. Next one, we have to solve the equation. So the first thing we got to do is factor this so we can solve it. So I'm going to draw a diamond. A is 1, so 1 times 24 is going to be 24x squared. Then B is 11x. Now look at my factors of 24. I know 6 and 4 would work. I know 8 and 3, 12 and 2, and 1 and 24. Now which ones add up to 11? Well, 8 and 3 do. So I'm going to put 8x and 3x. If we draw our box, ax squared is 1x squared. C is 24. Dx is 8x and 3x. So I know I need an x here and an x here. X times 8 will give me 8x. X times 3 will give me 3x. 8 times 3 gives me 24. So our two solutions then are x plus 8 and x plus 3. Now, the reason I put those so far apart is because we have these equal to 0. So to solve this, we need to put both of these equal to 0. Here I'm going to subtract 8 to get w equals a negative 8. Here I'm going to subtract 3 to get x. X equals a negative 3. Next problem, we got to factor this one, so we're going to continue just factoring. So we're going to draw a diamond. Now this time our A is negative 2, and our C is 12. So we'll have negative 24 B squared. Our B is negative 5. So negative 5B. Now the factors to get 24 are, or negative 24, well they would be 1 and 24, 1 and negative 24, or negative 1 and 24. We would have 4 and negative 6, and negative 4 and 6. We would have 3 and negative 8, and negative 3 and positive 8. Now I'm going to stop there because I see one that's going to add up to negative 5, and that's this one right here. So we'll have negative 8b and 3b. Alright, so this time A is going to be negative 2b squared. C is 12, negative 8b, and a positive 3b. Now, this is where it gets a little bit trickier. What we need are numbers that are going to multiply to all of these. So I know that at least I need a b here and a b here, because 8 has a b on it and 3 has a b on it. Now the only two things that can get to negative 2 are negative 1 and 2, or 1 and negative 2. Now I see that I have an 8 here, so So I can't multiply anything by 2 to get to 3. So I know that my 2 needs to go here. I also see that it's a negative 8, so it's going to be a negative 2b. Here I'll just have 1b, because negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 times what gives me negative 8? Well, that's positive 4. 1 times what gives me 3? That's a positive 3. 4 times 3 is then equal to 12. So our factors then are negative 2b plus 3 and 1b plus 4. Alright, now we are going to factor these polynomials completely. So what that means is find out something that we can take out of all of these problems. So the first thing it looks like that I can take out is a 4. I can take out a 4 of all of those terms. Now I also see that I can take an x out of each term. So I can take the whole 4x out. If I take 4x out of 4x cubed, I'm left with x squared. If I take 4x out of negative 4x squared, I'm left with a negative x. And if I take 4x out of negative 8x, I'm left with a negative 2. So now we got to see if we can factor this. So I'm going to draw a diamond. We'll have a negative 2x squared and a negative 1x. Now, it looks like the two things that I can add together to make negative 1 and multiply together to make negative 2 will be a negative 2x and a positive 1x. So then if I were to factor this out, I would have 1x squared, a negative 2, negative 2x, and a positive 1x. So I know I'm going to need a 1x here and a 1x here. This will be negative 2, this will be 1. So my complete factor is x minus 2 and x plus 1. Now the one thing we need to remember is to bring this 4x down in front. So we have 4x times x minus 2 and x plus 1. Next one, what can I take out of both? Well, I can take a 3, I know for sure. And I can also, looks like, take r cubed. So if I take 3r cubed out of the first one, I get 9r squared. The next one, I'm going to take out the whole thing, so it's just going to be negative 1. So now if I'm going to factor this, I have to check it because I have a squared here. So if you have a squared, you need to check it to see if you can factor it anymore. So I'll have a negative 9r squared, a negative 1. Now the only factors that I can multiply to get negative 9 are 1 and negative 9, negative 1 and 9, 3, negative 3 and 3, and none of those add up to negative 1 when I add those together. So in this case, our answer is just this. We don't have to factor out any more. Alright, this next one, I see I have 4 terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these into 2 groups of 2 terms. So one here and one here. In the first group, looks like I can take out a y squared. When I do that, I'm left with y plus 2. In the next group, looks like I can take out a negative 81, and I'm left with y minus, or plus 2, if we take out the negative 81. So now what I see I have in common is y plus 2 and y plus 2. So I'm going to write that here. Once I do that, I'm going to cross those off just so I can see what I have left. And I have y squared minus 81. So now that I have this, I need to check it, see if I can factor it out anymore. So I'm going to draw my diamond here. I'll have a negative 81 y squared. This time I don't have a b, so it'll be a 0y. Now, what times what could give me negative 81 but add to 0? Well, a negative 9y could, and a positive 9y could. So I can continue to factor this. This time we're going to have 1y squared and negative 81, negative 9y, and a positive 9y. So we have y, negative 9, and positive 9. So our factors then are y minus 9 and y plus 9. Now the one thing we can't forget is to take this y plus 2 and bring it down to the front. So y plus 2. Alright, last problem in our review. It says it's a vertical motion problem. So it says a cricket jumps off the ground with an initial vertical velocity of 4 feet per second. Write an equation that gives the height in feet of the cricket as a function of the time in seconds since it jumps. So h, that is the height at the end. T is time. V is velocity. And S is the initial height. So what we know about this cricket is that he's jumping off the ground. So what he starts at, his initial height is 0. He has an initial vertical velocity of 4 feet per second. So he's jumping with a velocity of 4 feet per second. We also have a negative 16t squared always, and that's going to equal 0. So our equation looks like this. Now it says how many seconds does the cricket land on the ground? So it looks like I can take out a 4t out of both of the terms because we don't need 0 anymore. So if I take out 4t, what we're left with is a negative 4t and a positive 1 equals 0. So then I'll have 4t equals 0 and 4t plus 1 equals 0. Or negative 4t plus 1 equals 0. So I divide by 4 here. I get t equals 0. Here I got to subtract 1. So negative 4t equals a negative 1. Divide by negative 4. And t equals a positive 1/4. Now we're looking for seconds. Does the cricket, or after how many seconds does the cricket land on the ground? Well, it doesn't make sense to have 0 seconds because you know he's jumping up. It makes more sense to have 1/4 of a second.